There was once a rank in the Jedi Order obtainable only by a select few, a rank that became so powerful and so dangerous that it was outlawed by the High Council. It was the title of Jedi Lord. Greetings, and welcome back to the archives. The title of Lord is usually synonymous with the Sith, so it's difficult to imagine that the Jedi would ever flirt with such a moniker. But there was a time when the galaxy needed the Jedi Lords, and they served a function that would save the Republic from the brink of destruction. But in the aftermath, they became such a problem that the Jedi were forced to forbid the rank permanently. In today's holocron, we are going to catalog the rise and fall of the Jedi Lords, and by the end, we hope to hear your opinion on if they should have stayed. So now, let's begin. To find where the Jedi Lord began, we have to journey back to the new Sith Wars, a period between 2000 and 1000 BBY. This would be the final wave of the Sith uprisings before their assumed extinction. For generations, the Sith had been throwing assaults on the Republic hand over fist. Each time a new Dark Lord rose, they concocted some sort of mad scheme that put democracy on the brink of collapse. But each time, infighting amongst the Sith would cause an upset in the leadership right before victory. This allowed the Republic to weather each and every storm, but they were growing more and more brittle as the centuries of war raged on. Thousands of worlds were conquered by the new Sith Empire, while even more were abandoned during the Republic's retreat towards the core. Thousands of long-standing corporations went bankrupt, and lawlessness spread as the Republic became increasingly overburdened and ineffectual. Adding on to this, numerous mines of valuable minerals had dried up. Total economic collapse struck right in the middle of an ongoing and a brutal war. In a dramatic move, the Republic deactivated hyperspace relays beyond the core, as well as colonies and parts of the Inner Rim. This severed instantaneous communication with the Outer Rim worlds and disrupted Sith conquests. This denied the Sith real-time hyperspace data, leaving them reliant on outdated coordinates. But at the same time, all of the systems beyond the core were left isolated and alone, and they knew it. They relied only on carrier ships arriving on hyperspace to send the receiving information. Finally, in the year 1100 BBY, the final century of the new Sith Wars, the grasping and bleeding Republic entered a dark age. In such a time as this, the Jedi Order were the only ones who could see the galaxy into a new age of survival. Big steps and even bigger changes had to happen or it would all entirely be lost. And so, Jedi stepped up around the stars to begin quests in the various unprotected sectors of space. They raised militia and led warbands. These valiant Jedi rid entire systems of Sith influence. At the same time, they purged slavers, warlords, and pirates, anyone who would seek to exploit these lonely populations. Each individual Jedi Master would rally the planet's defenses and throw off the oppressors. Afterwards, they established bastions of safety in these sectors, making them islands of light in an ocean of darkness. The citizens of these worlds loved their Jedi protectors and began to celebrate them for their leadership. In order to effectively lead the armies and governments, though, the Jedi inevitably gained political power. This wasn't a purposeful power play, though, but simply the results of requirements and stability. For the Jedi, these political powers were merely tools, and just like their lightsabers, they are able to be treated with the same caution and the same reverence. But this humble approach to leadership only resulted in them gaining even more power. The truth was, Jedi Lords weren't just celebrated, they were loved. They were loved for their selflessness, their defense, and their leadership. To maintain these bastions of peace, the Jedi remained behind as watchmen, but because they still held political power, they eventually would become kings and barons. However, it was not the Jedi way to accept royal titles, and so, this phenomenon gave rise to a title collectively adopted by these rulers, the Jedi Lord. The Jedi Lords established castles and manors as their permanent residence, and even went so far as to marry for political reasons. They had offspring which would become their heirs. For generations, each of the offspring were Force-sensitive, and would train as Jedi before taking on the mantle of leadership when they were ready. It was a medieval time that required medieval solutions, and the Jedi Lords were the only ones stepping up to facilitate them, providing sanctuaries for the disenfranchised during the Dark Age of the Republic. The Jedi High Council on Coruscant, however, was having extreme difficulty controlling the movements of these Jedi Lords. They were too far beyond their reach, and orders from the Council were far too delayed. Oftentimes, they had outdated information on the ongoings of the Rimworld systems. To amend this, the Jedi Lords came together and formed their own ruling body, calling it the Grand Council. However, this was not exactly sanctioned by the High Council, and worse, it now competed directly with them. The Grand Council was not under the High Council's jurisdiction, and they made decisions on their own on behalf and the behalf of the rest of the lords who had built kingdoms around the galaxy. It was at this point that the High Council and the average member of the Order started to become wary of the Jedi Lords, and a belief began to spread that they may be accepting too much power unbefitting of a Jedi. This came to a head in the twilight years of the new Sith Wars. A Jedi by the name of Lord Hoth was serving as the primary general in the fight against the Sith Empire. However, the High Council believed that he was becoming radicalized. In response, they raised up their own champion, who they believed possessed the facilities to spearhead the war. His name was Skir Khan. Unfortunately for the High Council, this would be their most catastrophic mistake yet. Skir Khan fell to the dark side, and would be the one to put together what is known as the Brotherhood of Darkness. You see, in this point in history, the infighting of the Sith had reached a point where the Empire had fractured. There were now many who claimed the title of Dark Lord, and the Sith way devolved into feudalism. The philosophy behind the Brotherhood of Darkness was that each Sith could come to agree that they were equals, with no Dark Lord ruling over any of them. As a show of good faith, they eschewed the title of Darth, and only referred to one another as Lords. This change rapidly grew their strength, forming new alliances and allegiances, as they now began steamrolling the Republic once more. The Grand Council then unanimously decided to put together a fighting force of their own, calling it the Army of Light, placing Lord Hoth in charge of all of the Jedi of all of their collective kingdoms. This Battle of Lords became known as the Light and Darkness War, and for 10 years it was basically even between the two sides, resulting in them both throwing an all-or-nothing attack on one another. This led to the now infamous Ruusan Campaign. On the mid-rim world of Ruusan, the Jedi and Sith clashed in 7 distinct battles over the course of 2 years. The war effort was completely miserable for both sides. Their resources were beginning to be completely tapped, and neither could gain an advantage over the other. The death toll of the Jedi caused the Army of Light to dig into the reserves of younger and younger Jedi, ultimately leading them to giving Padawans quick wartime training and shipping them to the front lines. As the Sith attempted with futility to inspire hope in their troops, and the Jedi sent children to their slaughter, the lines between the light and the dark began to blur. Finally, the Jedi Order had enough, as they began to boycott Hoth's war. Accusations then followed of him having fallen to the dark side. Masses of Jedi stopped signing up to join the Army of Light, and the Jedi Lords struggled to regain fresh reinforcements for the war. The charismatic Master Valentine Farfalla was able to rally one last shipment of supplies and recruits to Ruusan, but he was held at bay by the Brotherhood's blockade around the world. It was from this chaos that Darth Bane arose. He was ready to implement the Rule of Two, but to do that, he needed to destroy what remained of the Sith. Using manipulations, he sabotaged the 7th Battle of Ruusan, allowing the reinforcements to slip through the blockade. This was to force the mentally unstable Lord Khan into using a dangerous ritual known as the Thought Bomb. Bane promised that this would put an end to their enemy, but when all of the Sith Lords convened in a cave to perform the ritual, Bane ran as far as he could outside of the blast radius. General Hoth bravely took 99 Jedi volunteers deep into the cavern in order to put a stop to the Sith weapon. But when they got there, Lord Khan detonated the ritual, causing a blast that eradicated all life in the radius. What resulted permanently changed Ruusan's weather and altered its landscape, decimating the once lush world and making it into a wasteland. In the aftermath of the devastation, the angry and begrudging Republic was sick of the war. The Ruusan Reformation was signed, thus formally dissolving the Army of Light and preventing the Jedi from ever creating a formalized military again without the Senate's approval first. Now that the Sith were gone, the Republic was able to restore connections to the Rimworld worlds, and therefore, the need of the Jedi Lords was now obsolete. The High Council took this opportunity to decree an official to the title. To withhold the giving up of power now would be evidence of treason. What remained of the Jedi Lords willingly surrendered their positions and returned as noble Jedi of the Order, but they were all treated with disdain when they returned. The Jedi now believed them to be heretics. However, there were some Jedi Lords who gave up their titles but refused to rejoin the main Jedi Order, believing that their place was still with their people. Some of these such Jedi split into Splinter factions, two of which were the Corellian Jedi and the Tipo Paladins. The Corellian Jedi, also known as the Green Jedi, were still a part of the main order, but were highly individualized and held the well-being of Corellia over that of even the Republic. Their loyalty remained with the people that they had been protecting for generations now. After being treated with great contempt by their Jedi brothers at the end of the new Sith Wars, the Green Jedi would continue acting as the rulers and judiciaries of Corellia, establishing their own lineage of Jedi on the world. While they were still considered part of the Jedi, they had a very rocky relationship to the main branch and especially the High Council. They did not adhere to most of the High Council's rulings and only acted to benefit Corellia, shirking all other Jedi duties. This thinking would continue all the way until the Clone Wars, when the Green Jedi refused to interact with the Republic's politics and became a part of the Alliance of Neutral Systems. Unfortunately, they would all be largely wiped out by Order 66 and the Great Jedi Purge. But now let us go back to the Tipo Paladins. The Tipo Paladins were a group of Jedi who served under the Jedi Lord Tipo during the new Sith Wars. They followed his teachings closely, and were actually not considered part of the Jedi due to their more liberal beliefs. They accepted the use of blasters, as well as other weapons alongside the lightsaber. They wore masks that muted their physical perceptions as a means of growing more in tune with the Force, and they would eventually become known as the Grey Paladins. And with that, this was the formation and the destruction of the Jedi Lords. How the Jedi Lords once saved the galaxy, but became so hated that it was outlawed forever. But this is where we turn it to you. What is your opinion of a Jedi holding the power of a king over a planet or even an entire system? The popular opinion was that it was a necessity born from the adversities of the era, but in more modern galactic standards, it was no longer needed. However, perhaps if the Grand Council had remained during the Clone Wars, not every Jedi would be under the thumb of the Senate. Therefore, Order 66 may not have been so destructive. It's unlikely that the Jedi Lords would have adopted use of the clones in the first place, especially if they had their own kingdoms and had natural armies. If the Jedi Lords were still around, they could have resisted the initial waves of the Great Jedi Purge, maybe even forming a line of defense against the Republic and against Vader and Sidious. These kingdoms would have been safe havens for Jedi survivors, and the Grand Council could have fought back against the Sith. But whether they hold out long enough to win or survive, that's another story. But anyway, my friends, thanks so much for joining us in the archives today, and until next time, may the Force be with you.